how we got to this point.
Good morning, everybody. Back to Sanhedrin. Johnny just asked me a question. What was the question, Johnny?
Could you just refresh my memory how we got back to all this point about talking about sleeping and all this? Who's sleeping with who?
Right. Yes. Okay. Well, let's do that straight away. We're on Gemarah Sanhedrin. We're at the bottom of page 19b. Let me put it on the screen for you straight away. It is on page
113.
114 in the Steinsaltz 19b. There it is on the screen. How did we get to talking about Palti, Boaz, and Yosef? How did we get to that? So I don't remember. Let's have a look. We were talking about. We got to talking about that why Palti was called Palti Ale. That's one of the things we were talking about. And then we were talking about, before that, we were talking about, yes, we were talking about the concept of bringing up other people's children.
Yeah.
And that then we went into Paltiel, who was the wife, or Palti was the wife of or not the wife of Michal, depending on which version you take. And that's how we got to it. That's how we got to it. So let's go to where we're up to on page 114. We did last week, we ended last week with a league table of who was greater than whom. We had, at the bottom of the league table, we had Yosef, who managed to overcome the machinations and seductions of the wife of Potiphar.
Can I stop you?
Yes.
I mean, I really, really don't like this reason why Yosef is called Tzadik, because of this. And I've mentioned it to a few other people, and I came across something. I mean, there are all sorts of other reasons, much more sensible. Like, he overcame a lot of negativity in his life. He was thrown into the pit, but he achieved huge greatness, and also he forgave his brothers for what they'd done to him, which was a terrible crime. And I mean, he was lucky that he got away with his life. There are other reasons that he united the brothers, and by extension, he united the children of Israel. There are lots of reasons why do we have to deal with this one, which really isn't acceptable.
Can I say that I agree with you 100%?
Can I make a comment?
No, not yet. I just want to finish my little thought first, and then you can. I agree with you 100%, Julia. I referred to Yosef being called Hatzadik. There are quite a number of Mefarshim who do ascribe the reason he's called a tzaddik because of this, and I think it speaks more about them than it speaks about Yosef, to be honest. The concept is that the basest and most difficult yetzer, inclination to overcome, is that of the sexual drive. But I agree with you. I don't think the word tzaddik is the right description for that. And we know that from Pirkei Avot, because we say in Pirkei Avot, Ezehu Gibor Hakovesh et Yitzro. Who is the Gibor, the strong person, he who overcomes his inclination? If they'd have called him Yosef HaGibor, maybe. But I agree with you. And for what it's worth, so do other Mefarshim as well. It's not unanimously agreed that Tzadik is given that title of Tzadik because of this particular episode. As you quite rightly say, he did lots of very great things. He did some dubious things as well, if you read between the lines. But of course, there's explanations for those things as well. But yeah, I agree with you entirely, Julia, and I think it speaks more about the Mepharshim that put it in that category than it does about Yosef. Yes, Hannah, your turn. We can only see the top of your hips at the moment.
You're breaking up.
Hannah, you tell us, because while I'm breaking up.
Okay. The one was something that I thought of was it could first of all, for today we use the term Tzadik very loosely. In Orthodox communities, everybody's a tzaddik and a tzaddikah, no matter what they do that seems to be a little bit good. But here also they could, given the high priority that the Torah gives to sexual relations, and especially marital sexual relations, and the sanctity of marriage, possibly one of the reasons that they chose the term tzaddik for that was that he respected, firstly, her marital relations, that he wasn't prepared to commit adultery. And secondly, I don't know whether he was married at the time or wasn't married at the time, but I think that possibly they gave the term tzaddik in terms of the way the Torah sees the family and the family unit and violation of the family unit.
I think that's true as well. I think that's a good explanation, and I think it fits in with today's situation. If you think about, I was thinking about this as you were just speaking then, and I thought about it previously. I think it's worth just spending a couple of minutes on this because it's an interesting topic. I always thought, growing up, and even up till recent times, that there was an over-emphasis and almost obsession in the Orthodox world on sexual matters. So, for example, the halachot of yichud, where a man can't be secluded, if you like, in the same room as a woman who's not his wife or mother or sister, on their own. And the obsession about having women covered up from neck to toe, etc. And I'd be honest, I thought that there was a bit of an obsession about this, and thinking, well, if you can't control yourself for 5 seconds while you're in a room with a woman, then you've got a problem. But I have to be honest that I have somewhat changed my view on this over the last, 10 years or so, as we have seen the morals of modern society plummet to the depths that they have plummeted. And we can see, actually, that generally speaking, men do have a problem with controlling their yetzer. And perhaps all of this, what I consider to be over-the-top stuff, was actually necessary, because human nature doesn't change its drives. They've just become more acceptable and more open and more obscene and extreme in modern society. So I think you're probably right, Hannah. And I think what I said before to Julia is right, and that the Mepharshim who call him a tzaddik because of this recognized that was something that we do have an issue with. So it's an interesting sociological thing here, that it's recognized that men do have trouble overcoming this yetzer, and again, that's why the Pirkei Avot says Ezehu Gibor, who is a strong person, somebody who can overcome his yetzer, whether that's a sexual yetzer or a yetzer for gambling or whatever it is. If you can, or drugs or alcohol, if you can overcome that, then you are a strong person. But I do agree with Julia that to just say that's the only reason he's called a tzaddik is to minimize the greatness of Joseph. He did far more than that.
Also,
And in fact, one sec. And in fact, if you look at our Gemarah itself, our Gemarah is sort of agreeing with that, because he's saying, well, Yosef's a tzaddik, but Boaz was greater than him in that regard, and Palti was even greater than him. And we don't call Palti a tzaddik, do we? So I think our Gemarah would actually agree with Julia. I think the underlying theme of this particular Gemarah is in agreement with what Julia said earlier on. Yes, Hannah.
I'm a little bit embarrassed to say it, but I'll say it anyway. Something to Julia. Over the last few years, 5, 10, 15, whatever years, I've come to an understanding that being a woman, I have no concept of what sexual relations feels like for a man. And I take it on faith that what the Rabbi has just said and what the Chachamim write about, it's something that I can't conceive of. And I think that males are more in a position to judge how males should act in order to prevent the degradation that our society is going through at the moment.
I think that's a very fair comment too. Okay, you don't agree, Julia?
No, I don't agree. And I actually spent last night with a friend who is very knowledgeable and learned, but has very strong opinions. And we discussed this. And going on to Boaz, she doesn't believe that Boaz didn't do anything in the field. And she said that that's a total whitewash. So I'm not so sure. I mean, there's, we've got this Me Too movement. I don't think we need to understand. It may be that we don't understand, but I don't think we need to. And I don't really.
Point altogether. I think the point that Hannah made, that women and men are different. I mean, you've all, I'm sure, heard. If you've not read it, it's worth it. But you've all heard of the book "Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus." It's a brilliant book. It doesn't just talk about sexual matters. It talks about all sorts of the way men and women are different. It's a brilliant book, brilliantly written. Not a Jewish book. Very well worth reading. And I agree with Hannah's premise. I don't disagree with Julia's premise, actually. And in fact, I gave a series of shiurim on Ruth a good number of years ago, well before COVID. And so therefore they're not recorded. I think they're recorded on audio. I think they've got them audio recorded. And in fact, I also raised that question from the language of Megillat Ruth, from the actual language, as we often do in our shiurim. I analysed the language, and I also raised the question as to I think there are hints in there that Boaz might not have reached the level of Yosef or Palti, but for our Gemarah's sake, he did. So whilst your friend and I may have some misgivings about that, the Gemarah doesn't seem to have those misgivings at this point. So let's just get into it then. All very interesting discussion that, and we can take it further. Just while I've got it into my head, just before we went onto the record, Johnny asked me whether we're allowed to learn today, with it being Christmas Day, and he was referring to something called Nittelnacht, which was last night, and I've sent on the Leon Bennett group a link to a half-hour shiur that I gave a number of years ago about Christmas and the Jews, and that in there is something about Nittelnacht. If you like that and you are interested after that, you can send me a message and I'll send you the 2.5-hour version of this shiur, which includes about an hour of discussion back in 2019. Some quite heated discussion as well about whether we should have Christmas trees in Israel and whether we should have Chanukiot in the White House and all sorts. There were some very strong opinions expressed in that. If you're interested, I can send you the link to that, or you can go onto the YouTube website and just search for, put the word Christmas in, and it'll come up, and you can read it if you've got not, you can listen to it if you've got nothing better to do for 2.5 hours. Okay, right, let's talk about this Gemarah. So we left it with the league table of righteousness, let's call it. Palti at the top, Boaz in the middle, and Yosef Tzadik at the bottom. And we're going to carry on in that vein now, but go off in a slightly different tangent. And I promised you, if you remember at the end of last week, that we would be dealing with psukim that you will definitely be familiar with. And so let's get to it. We're now over the page on 20a. We should have a siyum because we've turned over a page. We're on 20a now, and it's at the top.
Past here, Johnny. The Dafayomi are nearly up to us.
Yeah, the Dafayomi are nearly up to us, yeah, but it's taken us 5 years to get this far.
Absolutely. I don't know how they do it. It's impossible. Absolutely.
Yeah, but impossible. Not only do I find it difficult to understand how they do it, I tried it once. I went to a Dafayomi share, and by the end of the share, I was so frustrated and irritated, and because it's just not my style at all. I wanted to stop him every 2 seconds. But for those that like it, it's a wonderful thing. It's not for me. 20 daf in 5 years is much more my sort of thing. Okay, let's carry on. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, he asks a question. My dichtiv. What does it mean when it is written, Rabot banot asu chayil va'at alit al kulana? Many daughters have done great things, have acted valiantly. You, alit al kulana, and you are above all of them. You have raised yourself up, or you are raised up above all of them. Where is that from?
This is a personal thing, but David Blumenthal says this on Friday nights with Kiddush.
Is it
Okay.
Eshet
Eshet
Chayil?
Yes.
He actually says this passage.
Okay, so we all say this passage on Friday night. It is an almost universal custom to say this passage because this is the last 2 verses of Eshet Chayil. Okay, where is it from? Well, I give it the answers on the screen. So no prizes for you for saying Proverbs 31:29 because it's on the screen. I should have removed it off the screen. Okay, hands up those who knew that this was from Mishlei. Nobody. Okay, well that's interesting because we ought to. Let's go to Mishlei, shall we? And have a look. There we go. Mishlei. There it is. Chapter 31 of Mishlei, Proverbs. And it begins on verse 10. Eshet Chayil mi yimtza. A woman of valor, who can find one? I remember when I very first heard this was not something we did in my house when I was growing up, but it is an almost universal custom to do so. We didn't do it. Don't think my parents knew about it. But I went, Jeffrey will know this, when I was 17 and I went to university, I went to live in my first year in Diggs with a very, very nice family, although I didn't think so at the time, who were friends of Jeffrey's parents. They were really, really wonderful people, although at 17 I didn't think so because they were very old-fashioned, they were very frum, and they were very yeckish. You know who I'm talking about, don't you?
I do. But they were the sweetest people.
And he only had one leg. Anyway, they were a wonderful family, and they sang Eshet Chayil. But this guy, Mr. Rhines, who had a wonderful, wonderful sense of humor, he never sang the whole thing. He just said, Eshet Chayil mi yimtza, a woman of valor, who can find one? And that was it. That was the end of it. You know, he said, no, nobody can find one. So
Talking about in London, Johnny.
yeah, in London, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Reynolds is my mum's cousin.
Is that right?
Either he or his wife was. Definitely had one leg, yeah.
Was called Ricky Reines.
Ricky, yeah, Ricky
I think
Reynolds,
he
yeah.
was called Zev. I think he was called Zev.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He had two sons.
To me, it was just Mr. Reines. But I think it was called Zev. I must tell you, they were so nice to me. They could not have been nicer to me. And I wasn't so nice to them. Et chata'ai ani maskir hayom. And my sins I mentioned today, I remember today, I wasn't nice to them. But this is where I first heard Eshet Chayil. I must tell you, by the way, there were a lot of things that I learned from them, because there were a lot of things that we never did in our house that they did. And of course, lots of those things I do, of course, ourselves now. So Eshet Chayil means this, of course, what is Eshet Chayil? Yes, Jeffrey?
No, I think Ricky was from a Hasidic family.
I don't think so. She was Yekish. She was super Yekish. I doubt she was Hasidish. She was very, very Yekish.
I remember her mother.
She was certainly a very, very religious lady, but I don't think
they're all related to my grandparents that you were talking.
I don't think she was Hasidish. I think she was Litvish.
Okay, you're probably right.
I'm sure she was very Yekish. She was a very, very nice lady.
What used to make they used to go to Hendon Adas.
She did. They did. And the very first Shabbos I was there, they took me, or Mr. Reines took me to Hendon Adas, and there was a kiddush on that particular week. And what was the kiddush for that particular week?
Someone came out of prison.
Yeah, it was to celebrate the president had come out of prison. So he made the kiddush. After that, I went to Hendon Rally Close. I never went again to Hendon Adas. I didn't like it.
Ricky was my mum's first cousin, definitely.
Very nice. Well, there you go. Another connection. Anyway, I digress. But Eshet Chayil, Mrs. Reines was an Eshet Chayil. She definitely was. She looked after Mr. Reines.
We didn't sing Eshet Chayil either, my dad either.
You never sang Eshet Chayil?
I don't think so, and I don't know, to be honest with you.
No. David Mark, did you sing Eshet Chayil?
Was it in the Singer's Prayer Book?
With the Singer's Prayer Book, okay. Right. Anyway, Eshet Chayil is almost universally sung now on Friday night. Nobody really knows when that started. My research while I've been preparing for this shiur indicates that it probably started with the Kabbalists in Sfat around about the 17th century. The Kabbalists were very into personification of various things about Judaism. For example, the very famous poem of Lecha Dodi, which we're all very familiar with, was written by Reb Shlomo Alkabetz in Sfat around about that time, where Shabbat is described as the bride. Yeah, Shabbat Hamalka, the Queen Shabbat. Lecha Dodi is welcoming the bride of the Queen, the Shabbat Queen, into our homes. And it's thought that Eshet Chayil referred, according to the Kabbalists, referred to not to the woman of the house, but actually to Shabbat Hamalka, to the actual Shabbat. And another opinion is that it refers to the Shekhinah, God's divine presence. Now, what's interesting is that the Shekhinah, the word Shekhinah, which means God's divine presence, is a feminine form. Yes? Got a hey on the end. Shekhinah HaTahorah, you would say, the pure Shekhinah. Okay? It's very interesting that all of the rabbis attribute the Shekhinah, or attribute to the Shekhinah, the feminine side of God, which is very, very interesting when you think about the fact that, we're talking about the 17th century at the latest.
Breaking up, you're breaking up. Honey, breaking up.
voting for Michael Stokes to probably write that up. Let me know when I'm back on track. No? No good? Somebody else say something in the meantime then. No? Can't hear me?
Okay, okay.
Good. Okay, so it's interesting, isn't it, that the Shekhinah, the God's divine presence, is the feminine side of God, and that's fascinating when you think that this was spoken about at the latest in the 17th century, and probably a lot earlier than that. That the men attributed the feminine side of God, or that there is even a feminine side of God. I mean, that's quite remarkable. The Shekhinah is considered to be the feminine side of God, and some of the Mefarshim say that Eshet Chayil is welcoming God's feminine presence into the house on Shabbat, and that's why we say it on Friday night. Nowadays, and it's difficult to try and pinpoint when this started to be the case. But nowadays, when we sing Eshet Chayil, it is almost universally seen as a praise to the woman of the house, which, in fact, during this research that I was doing for this shiur, I came across a really, really interesting podcast by Rabbi David Foreman of Aleph Beta about Eshet Chayil. And I think that once we have finished, we've just finished Shmona Esra in the Tefillah Shir. We did Al Anisim this week, and we're going to do Ma'at Sur next week. This Eshet Chayil thing that I've just read in preparation for this shiur is so fabulous that I think I'm going to do Eshet Chayil in the Tefillah Shir after next week. We'll do Ma'at Sur next week because I promised them. And then I think we'll do Eshet Chayil because this is just too good not to share. And it's a very interesting take on it. But for the moment, Eshet Chayil refers to, here we're referring to the woman of the house when we sing it on Friday night in praise of her. Yes, Johnny?
No, I said the word Shekhinah sounds feminine. I don't know.
Correct. It is a feminine word.
What would the masculine be of that?
The masculine of Shekhinah would be Shochein, something like that, probably Shochein.
A neighbor.
Shachein would be a neighbor, yeah.
Okay.
What neighbor? Why is neighbor the same word as Shekhinah?
Because you're close to it.
Correct, you're close. There is a presence there of your neighbor. Isn't that beautiful? That's a nice piece of etymology. Right, let's go back to our Gemarah, because our Gemarah is referring to verse 29 in Mishlei, which is the end of Eshet Chayil. It's the end of Eshet Chayil. Rabot banot asu chayil. Many women. Now he translates it here. I don't like this at all. Many women have acquired wealth. I don't think chayil is here necessarily referring to wealth. I think it's valor. Many women have acted valiantly, but you surpass them all. Okay? Now, let's go back to the Gemarah. Just have that pasuk in mind. Many women have acted valiantly, but you surpass them all. Let's now go back to the Gemarah. You should have it on the screen, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so, Rabbi Yochanan says, what does this mean? Rabot banot asu chayil v'atalit al kulana. What does this mean? He says, Rabot banot asu chayil. Many daughters have acted valiantly. Ze Yosef uBoaz. This is Yosef uBoaz. Va'at alit al kulana. But you are greater than all of them. Ze Palti ben Laish. This is Palti ben Laish. And Rabbi Yochanan is going on what we learnt last week, that there is a league table of greatness. And he says, Yosef and Boaz were great, but Palti was even greater. Julia is shaking her head, and I did the same head shaking when I read this for my preparation, because I know what Julia is going to say, and let me see if I can guess what Julia is going to say. Julia is going to say, what on earth are you talking about? Yosef and Boaz are men, and this is talking about women. Ubanot, rabot, banot, atu chayil. Am I right, Julia?
Only sort of, because I knew you were going to come.
Okay, go on.
I knew you were going to say this because you've said it before on a Shmor Aleph Shir that Eshet Chayil was based on Polti, and I found that incredibly difficult to accept when you said it then. So I discussed it last night again with my friend, and we both find it's unacceptable that that can be the case. And we looked up actually when Eshet Chayil was written, which I'm sure, and there's no answer to that. And in fact, one of the things is it possibly came from Avraham Avinu, which of course was well before Polti, but there is no real answer. There's many theories as to when it was written.
Okay, let's stop there for a sec. Let's just stop there for a sec, because I think it's worth exploring that. We know that Eshet Chayil actually is written in Proverbs. I've just shown it to you, right? It's in Mishlei. But Julia is right that there are certain theories that it was first composed, not by Shlomo HaMelech, who wrote Mishlei, but by Avraham Avinu in praise of Sarah, his wife. This is a bit like saying Avraham composed Shacharit, and Yitzchak composed Mincha, and Yaakov composed Mariv. I'm not sure that we're meant to understand that literally, because it doesn't make any sense really. But you know, it's a nice idea. Made that Avraham, when he said his hesped for Sarah, the beginning of Chaye Sarah, Avraham came to eulogize Sarah and to weep over her. It is suggested by some Mefarshim that the eulogy was Eshet Chayil. It would fit very nicely, and I don't think there's any harm in that sort of theory, although I'm not sure that we're meant to accept that literally. Another theory is that it was actually written by Shlomo HaMelech in praise of his wife. Which particular wife? He had quite a lot of them, or a very lot of them. Which particular wife was he praising in Eshet Chayil, do you think?
Bathsheba.
Bathsheba, correct, Bathsheba. That's another theory. Now that's a more likely theory, to be honest, because it is in Mishlei, and Mishlei was written by Shlomo HaMelech. So that's a more likely theory. I heard a brilliant idea, which I don't know if it's true or not, but I love it, so I'm going to share it with you. I heard the idea that Eshet Chayil was actually not written by Shlomo in praise of Bathsheba, but was actually written by Shlomo's mother. Who was Shlomo's mother? Who was Shlomo's mother? Well, we're going to learn it in Shmuel Bet soon, aren't we?
Well, and Shlomo wasn't born when Shmuel Bet listed everybody. No.
Shlomo's mother was Bathsheba.
Exactly.
That's right.
Shlomo's mother was Bathsheba, right? So the theory that Shlomo wrote it in honor of Bathsheba would be in honor of his mother. I heard that Bathsheba wrote it as a rebuke to Shlomo. What did Shlomo do with his wives?
Many wives.
He took he took 1,000 wives. Okay, and where did he get these wives from?
The neighboring countries.
Neighboring countries. And he went all over the show, making political connections and marrying beautiful women from all over the place. And I heard an idea that actually, let's go back to Eshet Chayil. I heard the idea that Bathsheba, Shlomo's mother, wrote this as a rebuke to Shlomo, to say him, Shloimela, what on earth are you doing, going off with all these non-Jewish women from all over the place? Eshet Chayil mi yimtza. This is the kind of woman you've got to find, right? On all the praises that we have here, she rises while it's still night. She gives food to her household. She works hard. She's a good woman. These traits, and then we go back right to the bottom, which we're going to look at in a minute in the Gemara. Sheker hachein. Charm or beauty is falsehood. Shloima, stop going after the shiksas. Right? I hate that word, but it works for this particular thing. Stop running after the wrong people.
Bimbos.
Hevel ayofi. Beauty is futile. Yirat Hashem hi tithalal. Go and find yourself a good Yiddish girl. Right? So I heard that, and I thought that was so wonderful. I don't know whether that's true or it's not true.
A good one.
But
I could support that.
It's definitely worth sharing that this was a rebuke to Shlomo HaMelech. And if you like that, we could take it a step further and say, maybe when Shlomo wrote Mishlei, he inserted his mother's rebuke into Mishlei as a sort of tshuva, as a sort of repentance for his bad behavior, doing all the things that he shouldn't have done. And he recognized it, and he's saying, you know what, Mamala? You were right. You were right. I shouldn't
like that.
Those things. I don't know whether any of that is true. It could be complete nonsense, but I really liked it. I can't remember who it was that told it me now or where I read it, but I thought that was definitely worth sharing with you. Right. So let's have a look back. Let's go back to the Gemara again. There we are. So I don't like this idea because it's Rabot Banot. We're talking about girls here, men, women. How can you say that Yosef and Boaz, who's referring to here? I don't know where Rabbi Yochanan gets this from. It doesn't sit particularly well with me, but there it is in the Gemara. That's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Not that he's saying that this is a simple pshat. It's a drush, and therefore when you're doing drush, you can, sort of do these things. But there you go. That's his opinion. He says this is part of the league table. And then we go to look, whilst we're on it, says the Gemara, this is beautiful Gemara technique. While we're talking about Eshet Chayil, let's have a look at the next pasuk in Eshet Chayil. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman Amar Rabbi Yonatan. You can imagine them all sitting around, can't you? Rabbi Yochanan says this, and the next one says, oh, while you're on that, why don't we talk about the next pasuk? My dichtiv, what does it mean? Sheker hachein, the verse we've just looked at. Sheker hachein. Chein is grace. Grace is deceitful. The hevel ayofi, and beauty is hevel, is vanity. Beauty is vanity. Sheker hachein. Ze Yosef. This is Yosef. Grace is sheker, is beauty. Ze Yosef. What's going on here? Is he criticizing Yosef? Hevel ayofi. Ze Boaz. Beauty is vanity. That's Boaz. Yirat Hashem hi titalal. The fear of God, that is what should be praised. Ze palti ben laish. So he's using the next pasuk to praise Palti and actually to criticize Yosef and Boaz. So what's going on here? What's going on here? I don't really know what was going on here, but the Art Scroll has helped me out very much on this, because the Art Scroll says as follows. He says, I'll just read you out the footnote in Art Scroll. It says these three levels: grace, beauty, and fear of God. It's footnote number 3 on Chaf, if you're following David. It says here, grace, beauty, and fear of God apply to Joseph, Boaz, and Palti respectively as follows. Joseph was tempted by a woman whose only attraction was chein, was grace. And then in brackets it says, the Egyptians were not known as a people of beauty. Apparently, the Egyptians were meerskites, and but they were full of chayin, right? So that's what it says. He overcame temptation by recognizing that grace is false, right? Sheker hachayin, grace is false. Well, if he wasn't very beautiful, he probably took one look at her and said, I don't fancy that, I'm off. But anyway, that's what it says here. Boaz, on the other hand, who was tempted by Ruth's beauty. She was tempted by Ruth's beauty. Apparently Ruth, who was not an Egyptian, where was Ruth from?
Moab.
Moab. Ruth was a Moabitess. Apparently they were beautiful, or at least Ruth was beautiful. He overcame by his temptation, Boaz, by recognizing that beauty is vanity, right? Palti was married for many years to a woman who, according to Saul, was permitted to him. He is described as a God-fearing person because only fear of God will prevent someone from committing an act that is only questionably forbidden. So far from criticizing Yosef and Boaz, which is what it seems like when you read the Gemarah at first glance, what the Art Scroll has told us, and that's in the name of the Maharsha, is that Yosef used the technique of saying, well, grace is falsehood, and Boaz used the technique of saying to himself, beauty is just vanity. You know, in 20 years' time, she won't be so beautiful, and so it's all a waste of time, so I'm not going to bother. They managed to overcome their temptations by using these techniques. But the greatest of all was Palti, because he recognized that Yirat Hashem Titala. Again, it's drush. It's not, I'll come to you in a sec, Jeff. It's not simple pshat of the pasuk, but that's what Gemarah is all about, is about drush, and it's very interesting. We've got one more explanation. Two more explanations, actually, of Sheker Hachayin, which we'll come to in a minute. Jeffrey, yes?
Could it be that Palti was a eunuch?
I don't think so, because if he was, he wouldn't have needed the sword in his bed, right? It would have been easy for him, and clearly it wasn't. Interesting you should say that, because we had I don't know if you were at the Dvar and Dvash on Shabbat. Michael Solomon spoke, and he was speaking about Yosef and Eshet Potiphar, and he brought down the opinion that the question that many of the Meforshim asked, which is this. We're digressing, but this is Gemarah, so we're allowed to digress. Yosef was accused of attempting to rape the wife of Potiphar. If that was true, what do you think would have happened to Yosef?
Off with his head.
Off with his head. Off with something else probably as well, right?
Yeah.
But he would have been killed. What happened to him? He was put into prison. Everybody knew that he didn't do this crime, because if he had done this crime, he'd have been, for the chop. And he was put in prison as a face-saving measure. One of the opinions is that why did Potiphar employ Yosef in the first place was to service his wife, because Potiphar is described at some point as Saris Melech. Saris is a...
It's cut out, Johnny. We can't hear you.
I'll just wait. This is a pivotal point here, so you have to hear me. Tell me when you can hear them again. This is very frustrating, but we'll get there in a minute.
You're coming back.
Coming back.
Yeah.
Yes. Michael Kraus. No, Michael's not happy yet. I know.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, back.
Potiphar is described as Saris Hamelech, which is Saris is a eunuch. We have that word in Megillat Esther as well. So if Potiphar was a eunuch and Eshet Potiphar was a hot-blooded woman, then in order to keep her happy, he needed to bring in somebody. Yosef, we know. What kind of person was Yosef?
Good looking.
Good-looking guy. We're told that he was a good-looking fellow. This particular opinion was that Potiphar brought in Yosef as a servicer of his wife, and everybody knew that, and so the whole idea that he would attempt to rape Eshet Potiphar was ridiculous, and nobody believed it, and that's why he wasn't off with his head. So how did we get onto that? I don't remember. Oh yes, I do. Jeffrey said that Palti might have been a eunuch. I don't think Palti was a eunuch. Potiphar might have been a eunuch, but I don't think Palti was a eunuch, because Palti needed to put that sword in his bed to remind him not to get up to any monkey business with Michal. Yes.
So if that was the case,
because
Potiphar's daughter, didn't she marry?
exactly,
Didn't she marry somebody?
you married Joseph.
Yeah.
Married Joseph. Well, that, by the way, answers another question that we were talking about in, I can't remember which one of our shiurim,
Forbidden relationship.
which one of our shiurim were we talking about the matrilineal and patrilineal line? Was it?
That most probably was
Gemarah shiur?
well.
It was a Gemarah shiur, I think. Anyway, whichever one it was, there you go, Michael. You're right. If Potiphar was a eunuch, how did Yosef marry his daughter? Well, we don't know, do we? Because Eshet Potiphar, the wife of Potiphar, was obviously a bit of a lass, right? So Potiphar's daughter might not have been Potiphar's daughter. Another opinion, I think David Marks raised this opinion in the Gemarah shiur a few weeks ago. One opinion is that yes, Potiphar was a eunuch, and therefore couldn't have his children of his own. And so he adopted a daughter. And who did he adopt? Conveniently, he adopted the daughter of
Dinah,
who had been raped by Shechem. And nobody wanted this kid because it was a bastard child, and nobody wanted it. And so Potiphar and Mrs. Potiphar adopted this child, and we had this whole conversation. And in fact, we had the conversation about whether a person can marry their niece. And I made an error on the Gemarah, and I said, no, they can't. And I think it was Julia pointed out that, yes, they can. And
It was
Hannah, was it? Yes, it was Hannah, correct. Hannah pointed out that, yes, they can. And then we looked it up, and not only can they, it is considered a meritorious act. So Yosef married his niece, according to that opinion, who was the daughter of Dinah, adopted by Potiphar, possibly because he was a eunuch. So it all fits in very nicely. Michael's saying, too convenient, Michael. Is that right? Too convenient for Michael. Anyway, there you go. Right, let's see if we can fit.
Question.
Yes.
It says in the art scroll that you read out that Palti was the highest level because he was married for many years to a woman who, according to Shaul, was permitted to him. But I may be wrong, but my memory tells me that we discussed how long Shaul was king for in the Shmuel shiur, and it was somewhere around 2.5 years. So how could Palti have been married to his daughter for many years if he married her when she was already king and David was coming now to claim her back while he's still king? And the whole kingship was only 2.5 years.
A fair comment, but David claimed him back after Shaul had died, and Ishbosheth was king by then. But it's a fair point. I suppose many years. You perhaps would be better off saying for a long time. But the point you make is a fair point. Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, let's try and finish this piece of Gemarah, because then we can start next week on the Mishnah. We've got just about 10 minutes. We've got 2 more little explanations here about our pasuk in Eshet Chayil. Davar acher, another explanation of this pasuk. Sheker hachein, grace is a lie, it's deceitful. Ze doro shel Moshe. That refers to the generation of Moses. Vehevel hayofi, and beauty is vanity. Ze doro shel Yoshua. That is the generation of Yoshua. Yirat Adonai hi titalal. The greatest of all is the fear of God is what should be praised. Ze doro shel Hizkiyahu. That is the generation of Hizkiyahu. Now, that is a very, very bold statement, because what it's saying is that the generation of Hizkiyahu was greater than the generation of Yehoshua and was greater than the generation of Moshe. Now, we're not saying that Hizkiyahu himself was greater than Yehoshua or Moshe, because we know that there was nobody greater than Moshe. Lo kamba Yisrael od Navi, there would never arise a person, another prophet in Israel like Moshe. So what they're talking about is the generations here. And what does that mean? What it means is that the generation of Moshe learned great Torah from Moshe himself. The generation of Yoshua was also great in the fact that it learned Torah. But the generation of Hizkiyahu was even greater. And this is hyperbole. It's not meant to be taken literally. It can't be meant to be taken literally. What it's doing is giving us an introduction to Hizkiyahu HaMelech. Who was Hizkiyahu HaMelech? Who was this chap? Anybody know?
I don't know, but in his time, didn't everybody, didn't even little children know the Torah very, very well?
Very good, Hannah. Very good. The Gemarah says, let's have a look at it. I got it ready for you. It's actually in Sanhedrin 94b, which is in what? 74 pages, 5 a year. Should we get there in about 15 years? Okay, so just in case we forget, we get there in 15 years' time, let's do it now. So it says here, we're talking about Hizkiyahu. Hizkiyahu was the king at the time of the siege of Sanhedrin, about the 8th century BCE. He was the king of Yehuddai, and have a look at this. What he did was Hizkiyahu was basically the first Baal Teshuva movement, right? He cleared out all the idols out of the temple. It was a tough, bad time before he came to the throne. Everyone was committing idol worship and all sorts of terrible things. He cleared it all out, and he started a massive Baal Teshuva movement. And if you have a look here, the Gemarah says, what did Hizkiyahu do to ensure Torah study? He inserted a sword at the entrance of the study hall and said, anyone who does not engage in Torah study shall be stabbed with this sword. What does that remind you of a bit? Altiel with his sword, right? Anyway, this is what he did. He was none of this carrot and stick business for Hizkiyahu, just stick. Anybody that doesn't study Torah is going to be killed. As a result, listen to this. This is what Hannah's just told us. They searched from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, and they did not find an ignoramus. Okay, they searched from Givat to Antipatris and did not find a male child or a female child, a man or a woman who was not expert even in the complex halachot of ritual purity and impurity. Do you believe that? No, I don't believe it. I don't believe that there wasn't a child who didn't know the halachas of purity and impurity. It's not meant to be taken literally. This is hyperbole. It's to tell you that Hizkiyahu oversaw a massive resurgence in religiosity, in learning, and was to be greatly praised for it. This is not Midrash, it's Gemarah, but the same applies to the Gemarah that says that the Ramban speaks about the Midrash. David Marks mentioned this in some context. I can't remember particularly in which context now, but he mentioned it recently, that the Ramban says that anybody that believes all the midrashim is an idiot. Anybody who believes none of them is an apikoros. Here it's the same with the Gemara. If you believe everything that you read in the Gemara literally, you're an idiot. And if you don't believe any of the Gemara, you're an apikoros. The skill is, of course, to choose which ones to understand literally and which ones to understand metaphorically and homiletically. So that's what our Gemara is referring to. It's referring to the later Gemara in Sanhedrin, which we've just done, and it's referring to Hizkiyahu HaMelech. Now, just a little bit of background on Hizkiyahu before we finish. Hizkiyahu lived in the 8th century. He was the siege of Sanhedrin. Anybody know anything about the siege of Sanhedrin? It's in Malachim Aleph, which we will get to our Tanakh Shir, probably about the same time we'll get to Sanhedrin 94b, maybe a little sooner, maybe in about 10 years.
Didn't Sanhedrin disperse the 10 tribes?
He did. Sanhedrin, yes, he was. Hizkiyahu was around at the time of the dispersion of the 10 tribes. From the exile of the 10 tribes by the Assyrians, and Hizkiyahu and Sanhedrin were enemies. If you want to have a look at it up, it's in Malachim Aleph. Let's just finish the Gemara now. Let's go back to the Gemara. So that's another explanation about this Sheker Hachein, and finally another explanation along the same lines. Davar Acher, we're over here. Another explanation, Sheker Hachein ze doro shel Moshe v'Yoshua. This opinion lumps Yoshua and Moshe together. That's the generation of Moshe and Yoshua. Hevel HaYofi ze doro shel Hizkiyahu. Then this next one is the door of the generation of Hizkiyahu that we've just spoken about, a great generation of religious resurgence. And the final one, who's even better than all of those, was the generation of Rabbi Yehuddai by Rabbi Ilai. Yehuddai, the son of Rabbi Ilai. Amru alav, it's said about him, Rabbi Yehuddai by Rabbi Ilai, about this person, Shehayu Shisha Talmidim Mitkasim Betalit Achad V'Oskin B'Torah. It's said about him that they were so poor that they only had one coat between 6 of them. So only one coat between 6 of them, and yet still they studied the Torah. It's a bit like the Yorkshireman sketch, the 4 Yorkshireman sketch. They were so poor they lived in a whole road and had to lick the road clean in the morning.
Looking for the back on the left, I think.
Sorry?
Pocket. Oh, sorry.
Say that again, Michael. Oh, you were talking to somebody.
Sorry, I should have been muted.
Sorry. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuddai bar Ilai, he was very poor and he studied Torah to a great degree. Now, whenever you see Rabbi Yehuddai in the Gemara, it's talking about Rabbi Yehuddai bar Rabbi Ilai. If it just says Rabbi Yehuddai, this is what he's talking about. He is mentioned the most in the whole of the Gemara. He is the Tana, the rabbi who is mentioned the most. He was a Tana, and he is mentioned the most. Rabbi Yehuddai is mentioned 3,000 times. I don't know if that's exactly 3,000, but mentioned 3,000 times in the Gemara. And one of his 2 main teachers were Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, mainly Rabbi Tarfon, and his greatest pupil was Rabbi Yehuddai HaNasi. So this Rabbi Yehuddai bar Ilai was the tops. Okay, he is the top guy in the whole of the Gemara, as it were, and so you can see why the Gemara is bringing this here to say that he was even greater than Hizkiyahu, and this is all brought down as drush from Sheker Hachein. Of course, when Shlomo Melech wrote Sheker Hachein, he did not have in mind Rabbi Yehuddai bar Ilai, who had not been thought of for another 1,000 years or more, probably 1,200 years.
Or Hizkiyahu HaMelech.
Or Hizkiyahu, for that matter, who had not been thought of for about 300 years. So, of course, it's not meant to be taken literally. It's drush, it's homiletical explanation, and that's what makes this so exciting. So, we have now just about run out of time and have finished that first Mishnah in chapter 2. And next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, we will start to learn the next Mishnah in chapter 2 of Sanhedrin. Any questions on today's rather eclectic shiur?
Sorry, what's that mitzvah? Just a sidetrack from the bird, when you have to clear the birds from the nest, not shaka. I'm just saying shaka.
That's Shiluach Hakein.
Oh, okay. Just reminded me of the same thing.
Yeah, this sounds a little bit like it. Shiluach Hakein, sending away from the nest. Yeah.
That Hezekiah thing it's a little bit ridiculous anyway. If it was at that time from Dan to Beersheba, he wouldn't have the control over most of the places anyway.
That's true.
He was the king of Yehuddai, and Dan's right up in the north.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Again,
I think it's
hyperbole. That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, but isn't it just a way of interpreting the beautiful poem and the beautiful words? It's not saying that it was a reference to them. It's a way that they can be applied.
Correct.
And there's probably lots of other things, lots of other situations to which the words can be applied. And
you're right. What Michael is saying is that it's not to be taken literally from Dan to Beersheba. It's like when you say, oh, it's 1,000,000 miles from here. It's not really. It's just, quite a long walk. So Dan to Beersheba means there were lots of people around who could learn Torah, which was a big chidush, because before Hizkiyahu came along, it was bad news. Everyone was serving idols, and nobody learned the Torah. So it's and again, when Shlomo HaMelech or Bathsheba, whoever it was, wrote Eshet Chayil, they didn't have in mind my wife and Julia and Hannah and everybody else's wives. And when we sing it, that's who we have in mind. So we are allowed to interpret it in any way we like. It's all part of the beauty of rabbinic literature and the Tanakh. Okay.
Even more modern minhag, Johnny, crept in quite recently is the Chatan singing it to the Kala under the chuppah.
Yes, that is true. Yes, my one and only son-in-law sang it to my one and only daughter under the chuppah. That is true. That is a fairly recent and rather beautiful minhag. I like it very much. Chanukah Sameach, everybody. Do not eat too many donuts and latkes. They are bad for you.
thank you.
Great.
Thank you for